A landslide victory for Mexico's Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the leftist, nationalist candidate who dominated Sunday's election, has raised questions north and south of the border about how the country's populist president-elect will engage with the similarly populist policies and rhetoric of Donald Trump in the years ahead. And with the North American Free Trade Agreement revision still blowing in the wind, the economic futures of both the U.S. and Mexico rest in the hands of two men who pride themselves in bucking politics as usual in their respective countries. AMLO, as López Obrador was dubbed during campaign season, represents an abrupt change of course for Mexican politics. Having run unsuccessful campaigns in prior presidential elections, López Obrador led a relatively new political party known as the National Regeneration Movement, which only formally registered as a party in 2014. His campaign lashed out at Mexico's more mainstream politicians and government leaders, whom he at times referred to as filthy pigs and a mafia of power. His victory, which saw him bring in more than half of the country's popular vote, based on preliminary polling results, will put a leftist regime at the head of Mexico's government for the first time in decades. Many are confident that he will bring change to Mexico, cleaning up corruption and putting the poor first. Others expressed significant reservations about AMLO but were simply unwilling to support any of the other candidates. Christopher Wilson, Deputy Director of the Mexico Institute at the Washington, D.C. BASC Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, said in a statement Sunday. In sum, it's a mix of true believers and massive frustration with the political class that seems poised to propel Andrés Manuel to the presidency. Andrew Sallee, president of the Migration Policy Institute and author of the recent book, Vanishing Frontiers: The Forces Driving Mexico and the United States Together, tells U.S. News Mexico's presidential election had much more to do with corruption, inequality, violence, real issues Mexicans are dealing with, and with Trump's public lambasting of Mexican trade practices and criminal justice shortcomings. And, indeed, López Obrador's candidacy was one built on the back of promises to change the status quo in Mexico, rooting out corruption, slashing the salaries of top government officials including his own presidential salary, establishing greater energy independence and providing greater opportunities for the country's most impoverished citizens. But it's difficult to overlook Mexico's increasingly fraught relationship with the U.S., especially given the Mexican economy's general reliance on trade and access to export markets. Trump has called for a completed border wall between the U.S. and Mexico, has repeatedly suggested Mexico will pay for its construction, has criticized Mexican authorities' handling of Central Americans and Mexicans crossing into the southern U.S. without documentation, has threatened to torpedo NAFTA entirely, and has slapped tariffs on international steel that have already led to Mexican-owned companies laying off American jobs. Appearances suggest Trump and López Obrador are attempting to walk a path of diplomacy, with Trump tweeting congratulations to the Mexican president-elect on Sunday night, indicating that there is much to be done that will benefit both the United States and Mexico. In a Monday interview with the Televisa Media Network, López Obrador responded to the tweet, calling the message respectful and indicating that such congeniality is what we are looking for in our relationship with the United States, that there is mutual respect. And yet López Obrador's popularity was bolstered by his campaign message promising that Mexico would not be the pinata of any foreign government. He has publicly suggested Trump and his administration speak of Mexican citizens in a similar manner to how the Nazis discussed Jews in the build-up to the Holocaust. And he has referred to the U.S. president as erratic and arrogant, suggesting his effort to erect the border wall goes against intelligence and against history. Comparisons have been drawn between the populist and at times seemingly unpolished rhetoric deployed by Trump and López Obrador, though both sit at very different ends of the political spectrum. And although discourse between Trump and López Obrador to this point has been civil, both will be desperate for wins on the NAFTA front and will want to minimize the appearance of concessions. López Obrador has vowed to improve labor standards in Mexico, which have been a sticking point between current U.S. and Mexican negotiators throughout ongoing NAFTA discussions. That López Obrador and U.S. officials have found common ground in wanting to see improvement in wages and working environments in Mexico undoubtedly represents a step in the right direction. and yet Lopez Obrador has offered other lofty promises of funding new education and employment opportunities for Mexican youth without raising taxes or throwing Mexico into debt. If he hopes to follow through on even a fraction of his promises, he likely won't have much wiggle room on the trade front to give the U.S. more than what Mexico can afford. We all know President Trump can be assertive. If we are going to have another similarly assertive counterparty in Lopez Obrador with a completely different direction in which he wants to take Mexico in terms of international trade, there may be a lot of points of contention, potentially, going forward. Rafael Elias, director of Latin America Research at Exotic's Capital, told the BBC's World Business Report on Monday. Elias said he is hopeful the new Mexican administration keeps many of the main NAFTA negotiators involved in discussions going forward, warning that introducing an entirely new group of individuals with a slew of updated demands would be akin to starting from scratch. Trade officials from Canada, the U.S. and Mexico had originally aimed to finalize a NAFTA deal by now for that exact reason, that a new Mexican regime could poke a hole in discussions that have now been ongoing for the better part of a year. But discussions dragged as Mexico and Canada balked at certain provisions requested by the Trump White House, including a sunset clause that would force negotiators to retool the agreement every 5 years. Trump over the weekend indicated he doesn't plan on signing a new agreement until after the midterm elections, essentially leaving discussions in limbo as Lopez Obrador prepares to step into office. Lopez Obrador, for his part, has indicated he hopes to reach some sort of mutually beneficial NAFTA resolution, indicating during a speech last week that Mexico and its North American neighbors are obliged to understand each other and to walk together in pursuit of a comprehensive treaty. But with expected antagonism from the Trump administration and Lopez Obrador's previous promises of standing up for Mexico's international interests, it remains to be seen whether the parties involved will be able to iron out revisions to the nearly 25-year-old trade deal. I don't see fast movement on this. What we saw over the last few months was a growing belief in Mexico City and in Ottawa that there actually might not be a deal to be had, that the White House and its demands are so onerous and unacceptable to the Canadians and the Mexicans that there is not a deal. D.J. Peterson, president of Longview Global Advisors, told CNBC's Squawk Box in an interview on Monday. At the end of the day, if the Mexicans feel that they are being pushed too hard, they will feel they need to push back.